Phil Polkinson here. In this video I want to talk about one of my favourite albums released after John Coltrane had died, called Bohm. And in this video I just want to talk a little bit about some of the understanding and the books that John Coltrane was interested in, which then seemed to, for me particularly, shine through in his music. And this is an understanding I'm quite familiar with. So I thought it'd be nice to share that. You may find some of these books interesting that you want to go off and explore. And I'll try and use some Western tradition as well to help us with that as well, because it's about putting the way you think about reality to one side a little bit, essentially. But I thought I'd like to scratch the surface with that a little bit. So before we go on any further, I think it's worth saying that this is one of my favourite albums, but probably my favourite Coltrane album is A Love Supreme, which we might suggest both these albums come from the very same kind of understanding. So before we go any further, let's make sure we're pronouncing it correct. Swami Ji can help us with that.
In Sanskrit grammar, if you look at Om, it's actually comprised of 3 letters. We write it as A-U-M, but it's actually not A-U-M. That's the closest we can get to in English. In Sanskrit, it is A, U, and Ma. And if you put it together, in English we say A, U, and M. If you put it together, it becomes Om. It's not Aum. Sometimes a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. When I thought Om is Om, I was right. Now the Swami told me actually Om is A-U-M. Now I know that Om is Aum. It's not Aum. I actually saw somebody chanting Aum. That's wrong. In Sanskrit grammar, when you have A and U together, by the rules of Sandhi, it becomes O.
So there we go, the sacred, the universal, the sound. What the Westerners, we might say the Big Bang. Ken Wilber cheekily says the Big Bloom, or he also says Big Bang, who heard it? Anyway, Ken Wilber, his work's interesting to explore. So this is distilled apparently from a 6-hour recording session. I'd love to have heard some more of that. So around this time, Coltrane was really exploring this book, the Bhagavad Gita, which opens this album. The band start chanting it, and they chant Om before they go into this extended long, basically just free playing, essentially, I would say, for like as I say, nearly 30 minutes. Coltrane was probably, I would think, also reading in this Hindu tradition, which is referred to as Advaita Vedanta, or non-duality. You've been reading the Upanishads as well, probably the Brahma Sutra, I would think, as well. All the great Sanskrit texts. Probably one of my favourite books that you can just read round and round, the Ashtavakra Gita, The Heart of Awareness. I just read that all the time. That book is very enlightening. And what we're looking at here is a different kind of understanding, a different perception of reality. Here's a little bit from David Bohm documentary, The Great Quantum Physicist.
If we aspire to go beyond our present state of consciousness, if we truly want to be happier, to love and know ourselves better, to regain meaning and wholeness, the old disciplines only serve to deepen the illusion of manifest reality. We must look beyond the veil of form to a realization of oneness, present in you, in me, the universe, and everything. When you grasp this, it will put you on the threshold of what is real and your place in reality. Reality is wholeness, undivided wholeness, and this fact has yet to dawn on billions of people.
So Bohm heard Krishnamurti, the great spiritual teacher, say the observer is the observed. To quote a favourite philosopher of mine, Alfred North Whitehead, we are finite beings and as such a grasp is denied to us. He also said to see one thing from one side is not to have seen it at all. And I think that's really interesting, well, particularly Coltrane, because he could play over any chord you threw in front of him, if you know 26-2 and Countdown and Giant Steps. But the short life he had, he was returning to this sound of just playing this one sound and exploring it, screeching on his saxophone. And so I think it's really interesting. I think this understanding is really shining through, and it's a new metaphysical understanding. We're taught in the Western tradition that we exist and outside of us is matter. Well, we're already wrong there, because we're inventing, language is an invention of humans. As is the what you might call the outward facing religious paths. We invent these words, but we're already wrong. When we see a tree and say tree, it's, to quote Rudolf Steiner, it's a dead corpse, dead concept, because it's certainly not a tree. So this is a different way of thinking about things. Again, I'll throw another one out there. Absence of thought, what is time? So absence of thought, what is time? If you're scientific and follow the contents of your experience, you haven't travelled to the future or the past. So once you start to look at these traditions, space as well, look at space. You can't be both here and there. So experientially, you haven't experienced space. So these things are really interesting, and this tradition, this perennial tradition, unpacks this, and I find it a very rich understanding. And as I say, I see it so much in Coltrane's music. Now, if you're interested in this from a Western perspective, Rudolf Steiner has a book called The Philosophy of Freedom, The Riddles of Philosophy, because that's already one step removed. So we, as I've said, our schooling system invents something outside of us called matter, which we will never find, but consciousness come out of matter, so that assumes that the mind is just dead and no consciousness exists. Well, in this tradition, everything is in consciousness. When I say that, I don't mean the thing is conscious, I mean that it's a perception in consciousness. But consciousness has no other qualities in it than it is just aware. I was 5, I was 10, I was 15, I was happy, I was sad. All the time those experiences were there was this presence, this knowing presence of awareness. And that in the perennial traditions we say I am, consciousness. In the Christian tradition, I am my Father, are one, God's presence. So these kind of things, these perennial traditions, they're all pointing towards the same thing. And it's very interesting to see that in Coltrane's music. So Owen Barfield was one of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien's great friends. You know, Tolkien used to say, when you've read Barfield, you can't think about the world the same anymore.
Well, I don't think that the mind is something that goes on in the brain. I think the brain was originally formed by the mind, or by mind, not any particular person's mind, and then use the brain to produce the subjective picture of the world in which we live.
So Barfield named this. He named this kind of, he called it the unresolved residue of positivism. He said, we name something, we make an idol of something. We give it a name, but we're already wrong. We're already on the shifting sands of belief because we're making a presupposition, but we come out from that presupposition. Nietzsche would say, all science is a hypothesis. So it's really interesting. That's the dominant metaphysics of the age, of this zeitgeist. I think Coltrane was bucking the trend of that. And that's what you see in these late works. So just briefly before I finish, because I've talked a lot about this, and I want to put the links in so you can listen to this music and see if you can transcend this time and space. And of course the music might be overbearing, it might be hard to listen to. But keep going, you know. William Blair would, in his Songs of Innocence and Experience, the contraries, you know, of good and evil and hell and heaven, in his prophetic work, he kind of unpacks that for us, like the ultimate non-dual understanding of the Hindu tradition. So some other books that Coltrane was certainly reading at the time that we know of was The Mysticism Sound of Music. A great Sufi book, yeah. So The Mysticism of Sound and Music. If you've never seen The Whirling Dervishes, you should. It's absolutely wonderful to see. And last but not least, he was also reading a British composer and poet and mystic called Cyril Scott. Now, I love Cyril Scott's music, and this book is amazing. Music and its secret influence through the ages. So it's interesting to see that he was reading those books, and I love Cyril Scott's piano concertos. I'll put a few links, and if you've never heard of his music, I'll really go explore it. So I hope that makes some sense. I've tried to touch upon what we call Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual understanding, from a Western perspective. And when I hear that, I just hear that in Coltrane's music more and more as I get older. And so I hope you'll find some of these interesting paths to go off and explore. As my teacher used to say, teaching isn't telling, this cosmic music. And I'll finish with reading a little bit from the sleeve notes of this album. Coltrane says, this is regarding this very album. He says, I wish I could walk up to this music as if it was for the first time, as if I had never heard it before. Being so inescapably part of it, I'll never know what the listener gets, what the listener feels, and that's too bad. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos. Bye for now.